Good morning, Kevin King, Mesa County tax slave. Thanks for letting me come before the throne again. I want to discuss, or at least two items on the consent agenda: C3 on the federal grant, and then also on C6, the other federal block grant. I'd like to discuss those two items, please.
Okay. All right, so we will move C3. Do we need a motion for that, County Attorney Coleman?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to remove an item from consent to individual? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to move items C3 and C6 to the individual consideration agenda.
I would make that motion to move C3 and 3.6.
Okay.
C6.
Okay. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Since we already have Mr. Turner talking about another grant, let's put C3 as I1, and then we'll do I1 as I2, and then we'll do C6 as I7, and just move the rest down accordingly. Okay. Okay. If there's no further action from the audience, I would bring it back here for board action to approve the consent agenda without C3 and C6.
I'd make a motion to approve the consent agenda, lest the two items be removed.
Yep. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Commissioners. So our first item today, needing individual consideration, we ask that the public limit their comments to a maximum of 10 minutes per speaker unless otherwise restricted by the chair, is item C3, which is the approval of an amended grant agreement, which we had discussed 2 weeks ago, in the amount of $4,226,773 between the Federal Aviation Administration and the Grand Junction Regional Airport for rehabilitation of the East Terminal Air Carrier apron. And we have Kip Turner, who is the airport director, here today to present this item. Thank you, Mr. Turner, for being here again today. So we'll go through your first item and then make a decision, and then we'll have you launch into your second item.
Gotcha. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. On the first item, I'm thinking is the one that was just pulled from the consent agenda. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so should I present that again in its entirety, or should we ask questions for what the, how would you like to proceed on that?
That's probably a good point. All right. Why don't we have you sit down in the front row. Mr. King, do you want to come on up and tell us what your issue is with this item, and then Mr. Turner can address those issues.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Kevin King again. So in reading the material that's posted on Mesa County and studying the grants and where the money's coming from and what it's for, and as a co-sponsor, Mesa County agrees certain acceptances. And as you know, in the past, those are where, I'm really concerned for future generations that we're going to be stuck with a whole lot of issues that weren't recognized to begin with. So for me, one of the biggest issues, I think if you look at the actual grant application, I'm not sure the exact paragraph, it won't come up on my phone in here, but it talks about, as co-sponsors, you have to accept the same agreement that the airport entity has to agree to. So in that aspect, all the federal rules and regulations and must, shalls, and will affirm to you are basically signing on to those same compliances. I think the specific one that goes into the actual agreement with the airport authority discusses a certain paragraph 21, I think, related to land codes and regulations and that sort. But the one that's really concerning to me in that in the compliances is the environmental justice executive order that you must comply with. So as county commissioners, we're in a oil and gas and coal region, and we're saying we're fighting for those people as a conservative board and those entities, and then we go and accept a $4 million grant that completely is against what you're publicly saying. So I'd like to have that addressed publicly on why you would accept federal monies in exchange for acceptance of environmental justice regulations.
Kevin, where is the environmental justice? Is it in the federal?
It's on the grant. Look at, if you look at.
I'm looking at the grant. Is
Yeah,
it
just
at?
keep going down. It's under executive orders on there, and I think it's 12898,
Okay. Okay. I see it.
I believe. So you see it on there?
I do. Okay. All right. I'm going to bounce it for the sake of fun to County Attorney Coleman. Can you kind of explain what the board's liabilities are with respect to the airport and grants that are signed off on by the airport?
Well, the way we've looked at this is the grant agreement doesn't apply to the county as a whole. It applies to activities and functions of the airport and the airport authority on the airport. To the extent the county would be involved in any actions on the airport, these provisions would apply, but they do not apply throughout the county for every county action. We looked at the Section 21 land use issue, and it basically says that the county will not and has not approved any land use applications within the vicinity of the airport that would violate or interfere with the functioning of the airport. In other words, we've got the noise overlay and the height overlay. Those all apply. We've consistently made them apply. Our master plan references that is an airport and that surrounding land uses must be compatible. So I don't think there's anything additional that applies to the county that would be contrary to what the county's master plan recommends and what our land use code requires. So I guess I don't see it as an issue.
Thank you. Come on up, Kevin.
So I guess for the record then, what you're saying, Mr. Coleman, is that Mesa County's overall land use policies actually comply with the environmental justice and other considerations. Those have all been taken into account already?
On the airport, because this, as I said, all of those requirements only apply on the airport. And Mesa County does not have, do any land use approvals other than specific airport requirements, and the city actually approves most of that. So it's not really the environmental justice provision doesn't apply to county land use codes applicable to Glade Park or anywhere else in the county other than specifically within the boundaries of the airport.
And I know, I understand what you're saying there, but I don't read that in the grant application. I don't see that where it says it's only specific to the airport. It's, you will comply. You're taking $4 million of federal money, you will comply with these set of rules. It doesn't specify only at the airport. If it was only the airport, what would they need Mesa County to sign on for? That's my whole point here. Why are we...
The only reason Mesa County is asked to sign on is because Mesa County is a taxing entity with the power to levy property taxes. The airport authority does not have that power, and so both the city of Grand Junction and Mesa County, the two tax levying entities, are required to sign on as co-sponsors for grant funds to be used on the airport. But you know, I don't see the requirements as extending beyond airport operations and land use approvals
you
on
understand
the
where I'm
airport.
coming from. I'm just trying to talk about Mesa County sovereignty, just the You know, can we keep the feds from butting into our business? That's where ultimately I think I'm troubled with all these federal grants is the tentacles drive deep. And, you know, I know Commissioner McGinnis will argue with me here. We're fighting that battle over drainage now, you know. So those are the concerns that I have as a local taxpayer and business person in Mesa County. When is that going to stop? I mean, it's just, we're going to just keep piling more and more requirements upon ourselves that we can't meet fiscally, which I don't think anybody here would argue. It's already created a lot of headaches. But ultimately, it's going to come back on us for those decisions, and that's why I always object when we start taking federal money for all the things that we have to comply with that we can't afford. So that's where I'm coming from with that. And then, do we collect taxes? Does Mesa County collect taxes from the airport authority? Is there a partnership there that there's no? They don't.
I don't. The authority itself is tax exempt.
Right, and whatever revenue they collect, which it states in the grant, they keep and use for operating expenses.
Sure.
Okay. But we don't. Mesa County gets no benefit from that, other than wages.
We get the benefit of having a world-class airport, but I'll leave that up to the commissioners to answer that.
Maybe use tax.
Commissioner McGinnis.
Yeah, and certainly the use taxes that are paid for construction operations, I think, are applicable. But in terms of direct benefit to the county, I think that's, you know.
Yeah, I guess, do we have a number on that? Is there a return on investment number that we get for giving up our sovereignty? Is there...
I guess I'll let the board or Mr. Turner get into that discussion, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
And
no, as long as you understand where I'm coming from, I just want to make
I guess
sure I'm clear.
my experience is that your options are not to negotiate with the feds and try to eliminate some of these requirements. Your options are either don't accept the money and you know, build your airport in some other fashion, and I guess I'm not sure if that's possible. So,
Thank you, County Attorney Coleman. Commissioner McGinnis.
Actually, Mr. King, I wasn't arguing with you and not going to argue with you today because I think the points you bring up have some validity to them. I think we have to reach a balance. The balance, of course, is we don't have to take the money. We don't have to have an airport. So we have to look at these, and I can tell you that because since the last time you were here, we really kind of laser focused in on this environmental justice stuff, and now we're beginning to see it in HUD programs. And that's this environmental justice includes racial, whatever the proper terminology. I don't have it in front of me.
I think this is low-income minority.
Well, not only
individuals.
just low income, but are the minorities, is a proper distribution in your community regardless of local zoning and so on and so forth to help assure the federal government is very complex. It's very punitive, in my opinion. It does not, in particular, necessarily apply with this area. Our problems are different. But the points you made are not disregarded. And in fact, I think we're going to see more of it. I think what we have to do is do what we're doing here, and I'm glad you moved this to the individual account. I'm happy to do it too, but that discussion came up when we had our Tuesday meeting talking about these issues, and you brought it up. You deserve credit for that. I'd like to hear from you, though, and not necessarily today, but how do we balance that out? I mean, we can't, I don't think that your position is that you close the airport, close the schools, close the roads, close the highways. I mean, all of these involve federal money. That airport is critical, and you don't argue that. It's critical for our economy around here. You use the airport, I assume, for your business.
I do.
And right now in our financial, I mean, it's a partner. And if you don't have 51% or 50% of a partnership, I've been in some of them where I have a much smaller percent than that, and I don't have much say in what goes on. And so we can get out of the partnership. So I guess what I look at, and to your credit in regards to your point of view, is the partnership worth it? Or do we have a choice? On the airport, I'm willing to, and I'm anxious to hear from Kip to see if we can negotiate those kind of things, what's
Right.
negotiable, and I'm all for it. And I think my colleagues up here are not willing, if we have some leverage, if we have some room, we should negotiate it. And we're pretty excited about our new airport director because we think that director has some expertise in regards to where there's some flexibility. So I don't want you coming in here thinking your time's wasted, nor do I want you to think that you're not heard. This is a big issue, and what really scares me is not this one. It certainly wasn't the drainage one, but that HUD stuff that's coming down, and we actually delayed. You weren't able to be here because you have to make a living, but a month or two ago, we had some grants come in. I forget what they were on, but anyway, we delayed the grants specifically because of the points you brought up. What's in the fine print?
Right.
And as it turned out, I'm glad we did delay it because they came back. We had our Scott Stewart and our financial people go through it, and they say, it doesn't apply to these particular grants. So we felt better about doing that. But we're going to have, especially on this homeless stuff, the race issues and things, this administration is going to do everything they can, in my opinion, in the next 3 months of their service, Obama, president, to hang, we call it Christmas tree in D.C., hang everything on the tree you can. So I think we're going to have a lot more of this.
Yeah, and that's
valid.
I think Commissioner McGinnis, I mean, you've been at every level of government, right? And I'm like, if anybody would know how the intricacies work in those environments, I mean, we have you right here at our disposal, and so I would think we should be able to lean on that experience to say this is how you avert getting in these situations 30 years from now.
Well, and essentially, King, on some of these, it's take it or leave it. I mean, and from the federal perspective, they probably take the position, we're not going to negotiate with every little airport in America, and they consider Grand Junction a little airport. We're not going to negotiate with every little airport. If they don't want the money, they don't need to take the money. We're a little airport that needs the money. We're a little economy that needs help.
Yeah, but I understand that. But if you look at the scarier part to that, and I won't spend any time on it, but if you look at the agreements with the United Nations and then, their 2030 agenda and 2050 agenda, and I've seen that globally in my travels in other countries that are adopting those same standards. It's to get everybody to a big super city, and they don't want anybody in small town America anymore.
And I completely agree with you. And so while we have agreement there, I guess the question would be, we represent the people of the county, and if we went to the people of the county and said, should we close down the airport because there's some possibility of risk that this
but it's see how but it's how you're questioning that to begin with. I think you go to the state and you say, state, we're collecting the taxes at the end of the day. Let's hang on to them and not send $50 billion to Washington, D.C. See what I'm saying? I mean, let's get the state involved and back in the municipalities and communities that are under their authority, ultimately.
And that's valid, but you're going on a false assumption. And I'm not being critical other than to tell you that assumption is that people at the state are going to agree with you. In fact, the control of the legislature is now split. It's one seat makes a difference. And my guess would be if that seat goes the other way in January, which it could very easily do, you will find the majority does not agree with you in the state Senate. But back to the point here. So where can we help you more? Not you, but help the people that we serve. You've brought the point forward. I think it's got some validity. What I do, or my recommendation is, we can't possibly know all the arms of the federal government or the state government or all this kind of thing, so we depend on our expert. And our expert's sitting right there in the front row, along with our expert to our right, the legal counsel. So I'm going to be interested. Kip will come up right after you are. Where can we negotiate? What are we tying ourselves on to? And then we have to, frankly, make a decision on the balancing act.
Yeah, I think for me, if you guys said, look, here's what we're accepting, and here's what it's costing you, Mesa County taxpayers, and now present that to the taxpayers and say, do you want this at this cost, this true cost, not a guess, a true cost of implementing those programs? What does that look like? And I don't think we ever really get any of those on anything we accept from the federal government. We don't get we get a feel-good, annual feel-good message or whatever, but it's not the true cost of implementing these programs or accepting the money.
The federal government's the 800-pound gorilla, and when you call them, Mr. King, and say, hey, we'd like to have an idea what this impact is, they say, you want the money or don't you? You want the money, sign, and we'll find out from Kip or Mr. Turner if we have some flexibility in negotiation. So it's
Well,
not.
I know what I found out when I call the feds is
Let me just finish.
they're going to
We're
protect the
not
system.
not on an equal playing field. We don't have that leverage. So my guess is if we went to, one, I don't know how we would have the manpower to determine what the cost of accepting the grant if we decided we weren't going to take monies for the airport, because I can assure you, every federal grant coming to the airport probably has, from this point forward now, probably has President Obama's environmental justice hook on it. I don't know how we measure, I mean, it would be devastating to this community if we decided we were taking no more federal funds, because, by the way, the state aviation fund, I think they're underfunded. They for some reason, they overspent, and they're in the hole, deeply in the hole, so we have problems there. So we don't have many I'm not sure we have any alternative. Take the money and sign, or no, take the money and.
Well, I mean, I guess to that, my question maybe to Kip would be, who's mandating spending $4 million on the airport? Whose decision was that? Is it the Fed saying you have to upgrade? See, therein lies the compliance, and that's maybe why they're offering the $4 million. But offer it with no attachment, no other. You see what I'm saying? Like,
that's valid,
yeah.
And that's why Kip's going to speak. But let me ask, and then we should allow Kip to come up. But have you gone to the airport board? We appoint we appoint 4 members, and then 3. The city appoints 3, and then those 6 appoint 1. So that's our involvement. Your most direct answer, or where you get right to the source, is the board itself out at the airport. Have you gone to the board meetings? And
so I've not gone to any board meetings, but I can easily do that and address the concerns. So help me understand, because under the past, when the FBI raided the airport authority, what's right above my office at the time, that's when I started looking into the airport authority and like, what's really going on here, because here we got federal agents storming a commercial building. At that time, I read the bylaws, and the bylaws were that the authority directly was under your responsibility between you and the city. Is that still the case? Because if that's the case, did the probe go any further than the airport authority? I mean, that's just a question I have, is where did that one end? Is it's just, so is that still the framework? I don't know. I can't find that anywhere in the new bylaws. So is there no longer, but you're telling me you're still appointing people to the board so that they directly answer to this board?
So the way it works is the city and county jointly own the airport. We jointly appoint an airport authority board. So 3 members from the city, 3 members from the county, 1 at large chosen by those members. They are an autonomous board. County Attorney Coleman, correct me when I go off track, but they're an autonomous board. So while we have control in that we appoint the appointees, and if they're not doing what we want, we can remove them, we do not have control as far as airport operations.
Right, I understand.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand. You're still the overall authority, ultimately.
Ultimately.
Okay. So that didn't change. I was under the understanding that changed.
The board completely changed.
I understand the board changed. You're right.
And I think the conclusion is that the structure of the airport is appropriate. But the people occupied, that we needed to have a change out there as a result, and I think they probably tightened up their accounting measures and so on. But what would really be helpful, to go back to the grant, because I'm interested in your initial questions, Chair,
Yeah, absolutely.
to have Kip come up and kind of help guide us.
Thank you, Mr. King.
And Madam Chair, I might add that in the supplemental agreement between the county and the airport authority does indemnify the county for any costs that may arise out of this. Now, obviously, you can debate whether or not the airport authority has resources and assets capable of complying with that indemnification, but it is, as you said, an autonomous board, and it's a legal entity separate and apart from either the county or the city, and to the extent there would be some cost to the county through any agreements, through the sponsorship agreement with the grant, the airport authority would be responsible for paying those costs.
Absolutely. And did you want to say something?
That's why we have an airport authority that keep the county and the city. Neither one of us are really large enough to run it on our own, so I came up with the airport authority concept whenever that happened for that purpose, I would believe.
And I will say, Mr. King, when I read through the grant, especially in the land use portion, everything said with respect to the airport, with respect to airport operations, with respect to the airport vicinity. So I guess I felt very confident that this grant agreement was very specific to airport and airport operations. So, but I understand what you're saying, though, because we do tend to accept things over and beyond what the grant says. So I completely agree. All right, Mr. Turner, can you talk a little bit about what flexibility or leverage we may or may not have?
Sure, and I'll also speak to my understanding of the situation as well, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. The airport authority, as clearly identified there by Mr. Coleman, is sort of where the buck stops, if you will, for anything we're accepting from the Federal Aviation Administration. It is a standalone authority, so anything that the airport accepts or does, it should be contained at that level and not be extended any further than that for the city or the county. The lack of taxing authority and zoning authority are the reasons why, excuse me, the authority does come back to both the city and the county for co-sponsorship of dollars in terms of grants. But as you said a minute ago, the airport would be the one that would actually pay those back in the event of a default or something of something with the grant. I think the higher item that's of importance to note is that we're not talking general fund tax dollars here. We're not even talking tax dollars per se. The airport grants that are received come from the Airport Improvement Program, which is a program that is completely made up of airport user fees. So we're not talking general tax dollars when we refer to AIP grants. We're talking about monies that were collected at airports across the nation, and as a member of that national airport system, we are eligible to receive our portion of those monies back every year. And so the monies that you see that we receive from the Federal Aviation Administration are not tax dollars as we know them here on the local front. They're user fees that are collected through the airport users, by airport users at airports. So it's a little bit different beast. And then finally, there is absolutely no flexibility. I have tried on other occasions for other reasons beyond environmental type purposes, just because wording was not the way we would like a certain thing worded or something of that nature. They have no flexibility on changing their grant language. As you well said, we either receive it or we say no to it, and then we're just turning down really money that is already ours to collect. This is just the process in which we collect it. So I don't know if that helps or hurts anything, but.
Commissioner McGinnis.
So, and one other point that Mr. King brought up, explain the $4 million. What happens if we don't, what happens if we turn down the grant? What impact will it have on the airport?
Well, two things. One, that's sort of our money to collect because it's something by the statute of the AIP program that is allotted to us on an annual basis. So we get so much money because of the size and usage of our airport from the AIP program. So we're basically saying no to our own money that's already in the system for us to collect if we were to say no. That's the first thing to point out. The second thing to point out is we don't have the money, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the county or the city. I'm only a couple of months here, so I don't know your financial records yet in details, but I would guess to say that neither of those entities have the money that would be required to maintain the infrastructure for the airport for the things that we have already known on the table today. For example, the second grant that we're accepting is for design work for the runway project. The runway project alone is estimated to be about a $100 million project. We're also looking at other projects that would be short on the heels of that for terminal needs that, we're looking at magnitude of dollars here that would be very hard, I would imagine, for either the city or the county to come up with if they, for example, dissolved the authority and took back over the airport directly and said no to federal funds. And it is important to remind the community that the airport, as per a last economic debt development study that was done by CDOT Aeronautics back in 2013, our particular airport contributes over $380 million annually to our local economy. So we, I would think, want to be very cautious about not trying to maintain that infrastructure. If we don't accept the money that we have in the docket for the $4 million, for example, our commercial apron ramp goes past a point of deterioration and where it's not usable at a certain point in time. That would mean then we don't have the facility to park the commercial aircraft on. If we don't accept the grant for the runway design element portion of the work, same story for our primary runway. There would be a point in time that if we're not doing what we've got to do to be in front of the issue, that the runway would become an unusable runway, and therefore we would have either a complete closure of the airport or we would divert to a general aviation only airport type scenario where possibly we could use a smaller, shorter runway for just GA traffic. But the commercial aspect would be lost, and it would be very detrimental to our community.
Okay. Any further questions, Commissioner Justman?
That explains it.
Commissioner McGinnis?
Just the only thing I'd ask for, if in the future, because I think some of the points that Mr. King has brought up in the past have some validity to them. If you see in the future, a point where you think that, and you'll just common sense will tell you if there's something that's pretty offensive or detrimental. You see there's a point where you think we've got some negotiating leverage. Or if you see a grant that said, look, you really need to be aware that this doesn't balance out. You can take the money, but what you just signed on to give you such impediments that you'll wish you hadn't signed it. We would certainly, and I think the Commission would certainly appreciate you advising us.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's also important to note that they don't offer, we actually go and apply for the grants. So when we're in front of you like today trying to move forward with a request, it's something that we initiated. We saw a need on our airfield that drove the need to put in for the AIP dollars that are there for us to use and use appropriately. And I can tell you that it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. The infrastructure needs that we have at not only our airport, but the airport infrastructure nationwide is critical. We need congressional action to actually take efforts to increase those pots of money, if you will, for us to do even more work that needs to be done. It's just a matter of infrastructure that was built and designed many, many years ago at most cases for regional airports nationwide. The demand has, in aviation, look what it's done in over 100 years. I mean, it's a very new industry, but it's an industry that, while it has taken off in many facets and forms, the infrastructure has lagged because of the correct funding mechanisms being in place to keep that infrastructure up. Sort of the same story with the interstate highway system. It's just, the demand's just a lot more than what we anticipated when they were initially built.
One final point. Would you just, for the purposes of our audience here, when are the board meetings, and they're open to the public and so on, just?
Absolutely.
Where are they held?
They are third Thursday of every month at the airport, and they're always posted and
The main terminal, they go upstairs in the main terminal, or is it somewhere?
they are currently upstairs in the second floor. There's a room next to the TSA checkout or check-in counter that we're currently using. That may be changing, but currently, and it'll be well posted at the airport. But the meetings are publicly posted at both the city, county level, and then through postings that we do as well.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Okay.
So what time do you have those meetings, at 6?
They're typically set for the afternoon, and usually they begin around 5, and it's always posted. The
Thanks.
meetings are always posted, but I think they're typically around 5.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Mr.
This
King?
may be a question for one of their meetings, but I know just recently in the newspaper they talked about refunding $500 million or $500,000 for a fence or something like that. So I guess with his point of saying it's their monies collected overall and they get to keep them, why are we having to fill out grants? So I guess that would be my question, is why are we filling out grants, and then why are we still refunding back $500,000 over a fence project and an empty building out there as well that we spent $4 million on, and now we're spending another $1 million to tear down? I think those are the kind of things that really throw up a lot of red flags when we start taking money, but now they're asking for it back. So that it kind of, if that comment didn't make any sense to me, can you clarify?
Well,
They would give it back at $500,000.
I think these are really good questions for the Airport Board Authority, and I actually think...
I understand that, but you're the overall, right,
Sure.
operator.
Yes. But I do think, and not to throw him under the bus, but I do think you should sit down with Steve Wood. He's their chairman. I think you guys would get along real well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to discuss this item? All right. With that, I would bring it back here for board action.
I'd make a motion we approve the item as presented.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Motion passes.